he addresses this to Lieutenant Shaw. He was in Derrick's company, and he names them 4 white men. And after you've made yourself acquainted with all the facts and circumstances relating to the charge of them having killed a Cherokee Indian by the name of, I can't pronounce it, Ardahi, you will deliver them over to the civil authority of Walker County for examination, confinement, and trial. And then he says, on your way to the county seat of Walker County, you will have the body of Darhe taken up and examined in order to ascertain, if possible or practicable, whether he was the Indian said to be killed by Smith and others. And then he goes on, I left the latter part of it in there because he refers specifically to the crime of murder. So I'm a retired policeman and a retired homicide investigator, so that was particularly interesting to me as to how long it had been that he had been buried and what the condition of the remains might have been and what they hoped to discover, I guess, to try to determine if the remains would demonstrate it, whether he had been shot, where he had been shot in the body, and those kinds of things. They did that, and later they did testify regarding that at the trial of these men in Walker Courthouse. It's in the book in detail, and all of you, of course, will want one. And here's the reimbursement process. Now, sometimes you could learn something from the reimbursement process that you couldn't learn from the orders of something else. And this is an example. These men were released. These men were arrested for this murder. They had a hearing in Walker County Courthouse, and they were released. Well, good sakes. In 1837, they could have gone anywhere and never been found again. But for some reason, they didn't. I guess they didn't fear the courts or whatever. They stayed around. So there is no record in General Wool's orders or whatever showing that there was ever a trial. But in this reimbursement, you see that Lieutenant Warren Clayton, who was wound up being responsible for all the logistics here, was paid for transportation of baggage from New Echota to the Walker Courthouse and back to New Echota. Just got the mileage, the rate per mile, and so forth. That was May of 1837. This other activity was in March. And there's an attachment here which says that they were sent without arms and that they were there as witnesses. So that tells me I'm satisfied that they went and testified in the trial of these men. And then this was an article from August 31st, 1890 in a Savannah newspaper, the Morning News, entitled A Queer Claim. And this was one of Buffington's soldiers, a man named Pickens T. Reynolds. I know where his grave is, not far from my house there. Quite a colorful character, lived till 1899. And he filed a claim on his horse and got paid, by the way, because his horse stepped in a post hole at New Echota and broke its neck. Threw him off and broke its neck and died. And by George, he wanted pay for that horse because it was his horse and he brought it from Hall County to New Echota. And they paid him for it in 1893. That the horse had died in 1837. And there's tenacity and determination. It says in the last paragraph here, in his petition it is set out that he is 73 years old, and that it is, as it is dated 1873, he is at this writing 90 years of age, that he was a private in Captain Buffington's company, a mounted militiaman, commanded by General Wool, charged with the removal of the Cherokee Indians from Georgia in 1836 and 7. That his gray mare, which he took into that service in December 1836, was killed on September the 15th, 1837, by falling into a post hole and breaking her neck. By the way, he later on went to Fort Buffington, and he filed for a pension, and it is a mother lode of information because Pickens T. Reynolds was never happy with anything. And he got measles when he was at Fort Buffington, and he swore that he lost sight in one of his eyes and all these other things happened to him, and by George, it was the surgeon's fault. So he describes in detail how the hospital was set up. I sent all this to Dr. Hill. Even talked about the distances from the fort to this building and that building. It's great stuff. And he continued to do that till he died in 1899. And as a matter of fact, his obituary in one of the Gainesville papers says he was an eccentric character. And that was being kind, apparently. But folks like that get a lot of, you get a lot of information. He even got his pension doubled. Many years, she got hers doubled by an act of Congress. So when we use that expression, it'll take an act of Congress. They got it done. And then, I'm just about done. Then, this is Lindsay. Colonel William Lindsay took over. General Wool was dismissed, as you know. And Lindsay took over in July of 1837 here. And this is where he orders Captain Buffington with his company to the neighborhood of Canton, Cherokee County, to select a suitable position for a cantonment and so forth. He will proceed to erect huts, stables for his company, other buildings necessary for the post as soon as practical, according to the plan herewith furnished. I really would love to have seen that, as others would. It was not a part of it. He apparently kept that. And here they appointed here's where Captain Derrick went to Jones up in Gilmer County. I was sharing that with those folks recently. And I just put these in there. If you ever want to look at these records, this is my ancestor and his compiled service records. It shows you such things as when he was mustered in, December 25th, 1837 at Fort Buffington. Here it shows that he was absent on furlough at the end of 1837 and other things. Now sometimes it'll show you, as you see here, there we go. No, it went backwards there. Hold on. Here we go. It'll show you other things. For instance, the two on the right, those two men, it shows where they died here at New Chota. Robert Jarrett, Nimrod Dean. One died on April the 3rd of 37. The other one died March the 5th of 37. And their names were not born on the muster out roll in July. I guess not. And here, they would charge them. If they lost anything, they got charged for it. This is something I passed along to Dr. Hill. I said, if y'all ever find the location of Fort Buffington, dig, you'll find all kinds of stuff because they lost half their equipment and had to pay for it. And what they really lost a lot were the flints. That was something that struck me, that every time they get a shipment of rifles, which Fort Buffington was an armory, that they would get 3 or 4 flints for each weapon, which would make sense because they'd lose them and break them all the time. So I said, there's going to be a pile of flint over there somewhere if you can ever find it. This man lost his bayonet and they charged him 144 cents for it. Caleb B. Smith. And then in the 1850s, the bounty land, as you're aware of, I just stuck that in there. This is an original copy of an original bounty land warrant that my ancestor received. And he never got to cash this one in. He still had it in his possession when he died in 1856. So he had a minor son. His minor son made a claim on this. You're talking about an excited fellow. When they brought me my ancestor's bounty land file, it was about 3 inches thick. And I spent a lot of time, because it was affidavits and letters that went on for years, making claims on that 80 acres of land. And that minor son got that 80 acres of land in 1890 in Alabama. And he lived out the rest of his life there and he's buried there. And those pension records, the pensions are indexed, but the bounty land claims are not. You just have to take a shot, especially when you're doing a whole company, which I did. But I persuaded those folks there to, let me do more than just a limited number. And I got to go through all of them. Found a lot of good information. And then I want to leave you with this. You're the first folks to see this. I'm convinced this is a key from a lock at Fort Buffington, which I have in my possession. You can see the size of it. It's 5 inches long. I can't prove that that's what it is, but you can look at it and see the age. It's what's called a bridge ward key, which were invented in 1830. It was in possession of my great-grandfather when he died in January of 1908, and my grandfather went to great lengths to obtain this key and keep it. I have a 93-year-old aunt, my dad's sister, and she had it in her possession and recently gave it to me. And I said, she's in a nursing home, I said, can you remember where the key came from? She said, yes, I knew where the key came from, but I can no longer remember. I can't recall. But it came from an important place, and it goes way back in the family. So now I have a working hypothesis that that's a key that my ancestor brought home from Fort Buffington. Now, in addition to the key being very old and being a family treasure, and I can't imagine why a key would be a treasure, is that my ancestor, found records of him as an extra duty man, building the blockhouses and the pickets at Fort Buffington. By the way, he's almost 60 years old at the time. He was a master craftsman, a master carpenter, and a wagon maker, a wheelwright. All of his sons were the same thing. based on all of that, I know he was, from the records, that he was engaged in building and doing finish work on the blockhouses and other buildings at Fort Buffington. That's my working hypothesis, that that's a key from Fort Buffington, the lock there. If you have any suggestions for me on how to try to obtain more information on such things as metallurgy on that key, or any records that, if they exist, on what kind of locks. I found the requisitions where they sent the locks and keys, large numbers of them, to Fort Buffington, but it don't describe them. It just lists them as locks and keys. I'm convinced this is from Fort Buffington.